A police dog kept sniffing a priest's cross necklace during the funeral of a young child. Initially, people thought it was just an interruption. But when the priest removed the necklace, the entire congregation fell silent. Here's what happened. Before we begin, take a moment to leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. And if you're a fan of incredible police dog stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe. You won't want to miss what's coming next. The soft strains of Amazing Grace echoed throughout St. Augustine's Cathedral as mourners gathered to say their final goodbyes to 10-year-old Tommy Wilson. The sound of rain tapping gently against the church's stained glass windows seemed to mirror the tears of the congregation. Officer Daniel Hayes stood near the rear, his Dutch Shepherd companion, Maverick, sitting quietly at his side. Both stood as silent witnesses to the heartbreak unfolding before them. The last 72 hours had been filled with relentless activity since Tommy's body was discovered. Hayes and Maverick had been among the first on the scene when a jogger found the child's body partially hidden beneath a fallen tree in the woods behind the church. The crime scene had offered little to go on. No fingerprints, no clear footprints left in the sodden earth, no witnesses. The autopsy results confirmed what was already suspected: blunt force trauma to the back of the head. A single powerful blow. The time of death was estimated to be between 4:30 and 6 p.m. on Wednesday afternoon, just after Tommy was last seen leaving his after-school program. At the front of the church, Tommy's small white casket rested solemnly, surrounded by baseball gloves and wildflowers. Mementos of a childhood that was tragically cut short. Nearby, a Little League jersey with the name, Wilson, and the number 7 proudly displayed hung on a nearby wall. A poignant reminder of Saturday mornings that would never come again. A series of photos showed Tommy's bright eyes and infectious smile, at Disney World with his family, holding a trophy with his baseball team, laughing with his friends at what seemed to be a school carnival. The stark contrast between those lively images and the stillness of the white casket struck Hayes with a deep, physical ache. As the lead K-9 officer on the case, Hayes felt the weight of his duty but was also profoundly moved by the pain of watching parents bury their own child. Parents who, instead of shopping for a graduation suit, had spent the day selecting the clothes their son would wear in his final resting place. "He was taken from us far too soon." Father Thomas Sullivan's voice resonated from the pulpit, his words filling the quiet church. The priest, a tall man with streaks of silver in his dark hair and wearing wire-rimmed glasses, gestured toward Tommy's grieving parents in the front pew. "But we must trust in God's plan, even when our hearts break beyond repair." Bishop Gregory Hoffman sat quietly nearby, his elaborate robes and somber expression lending weight to the ceremony. Tommy's mother sobbed softly, her husband's arm wrapped around her for support. Both of them somehow managing to remain standing, despite the crushing weight of their sorrow. It was during the communion procession that Maverick's unusual behavior began to draw attention. Maverick's behavior suddenly shifted as Father Sullivan moved down the aisle. The silver cross hanging from a chain around his neck caught the light, and the dog's ears perked up. Hayes felt the subtle change in his partner's stance, the tension that only comes from years of experience. "Easy, boy," Hayes whispered softly, placing a calming hand on Maverick's back. The dog responded with a faint whine, his eyes never leaving Father Sullivan, following his every movement with an intensity that was unlike anything Hayes had seen before. As the priest drew closer to their position, Maverick's focus intensified. When Father Sullivan passed directly in front of them, the dog suddenly lunged forward, pulling hard against his leash. The priest stumbled, nearly dropping the communion chalice, and several people turned in alarm. "Maverick, heel!" Hayes commanded sharply, his face reddening with embarrassment as he tried to pull the dog back. But Maverick refused to comply, continuing to strain toward the priest, his gaze fixed on the silver cross hanging around Father Sullivan's neck. Father Sullivan quickly regained his composure, offering Hayes a tight smile. "Animals sense things differently than we do," he remarked. But Hayes caught a fleeting moment in the priest's eyes, was it fear, before he continued down the aisle. As the service went on, it became clear that Father Sullivan was growing increasingly uneasy. The priest repeatedly reached for the cross, his fingers nervously adjusting it as he delivered the final blessing. Detective Harper Lane, who had been working closely with Hayes and Maverick, caught his eye from across the aisle. Her questioning look conveyed her professional concern. As the lead investigator on Tommy's case, Lane had spent the past 3 days searching the woods where Tommy's body had been discovered. "Maybe we should step outside," Officer Jason Martinez whispered, leaning in from Hayes' left. "Whatever's got him worked up, this isn't the place." Hayes nodded reluctantly, preparing to lead Maverick toward the exit. But the dog suddenly planted his feet, refusing to budge. Anyone familiar with K9 units would recognize that this wasn't simple disobedience. Maverick wasn't just ignoring his command, he was communicating something, and he was doing so with absolute conviction. From the front pew, Tommy's mother turned slightly. Her tear-streaked face registered confusion at the minor disruption. Hayes offered an apologetic nod, feeling a pang of guilt for adding any stress to her already unbearable day. Hayes had been working with Maverick for 3 years. Their partnership had formed after Hayes lost his previous partner during a warehouse raid. The loss had nearly ended his career, not just the loss of a K9 partner, but the trauma of watching it unfold. He had been unable to reach his dog, Rex, in time as the building collapsed around them. For months afterward, Hayes had refused to even consider a new partner, burying himself in paperwork and reviews to avoid the K9 training facility where painful memories lingered. When Captain Reynolds finally convinced him to meet Maverick, Hayes had been skeptical. "This one's different," Reynolds had insisted. "The behavioral specialist says he's never seen such natural detection abilities." Maverick, then unnamed, had not barked or jumped like the other candidate dogs. Instead, he had simply studied Hayes with intelligent eyes, as if recognizing the grief that weighed on him. When Hayes had knelt down before the kennel, fighting his own reluctance, Maverick had approached slowly. He had pressed his nose gently against Hayes' hand through the chain link, an unspoken acknowledgement of shared pain. Maverick's abilities had broken through Hayes' carefully constructed emotional walls. Their first training sessions had highlighted the dog's extraordinary skills. While most police dogs required months of training to specialize in detecting specific scents, Maverick exhibited almost supernatural abilities, particularly in finding hidden objects tied to human distress. What was even more remarkable was his uncanny intuition about Hayes' emotions. On tough days, Maverick would press close, offering comfort. On others, he instinctively gave him the space he needed. Their bond went beyond the typical handler-K9 relationship. 6 months after their certification, Maverick had proved his remarkable abilities during the Anderson kidnapping case. He had tracked 7-year-old Lily Anderson to an abandoned well, 3 miles from where she had gone missing. It was far outside the established search perimeter. As Hayes observed Maverick's fixation on Father Sullivan's cross, he recalled his lieutenant's words. "Trust your partner. Sometimes the rulebook doesn't have all the answers." As the funeral service came to a close, Hayes navigated through the crowd toward Detective Lane, who was engaged in a quiet conversation with the school principal near the side altar. Maverick remained beside him, moving with practiced precision, though his focus was still fixed on Father Sullivan's cross. "We need to talk," Hayes murmured, drawing Lane aside. "Maverick's behavior isn't random. Something about that cross is triggering his strongest alert response." Lane's expression remained professionally neutral, but her eyes sharpened with interest. "Tell me what you're thinking." "Tommy was found in the woods behind the church property," Hayes said, keeping his voice low. "No physical evidence at the scene, no witnesses. Cause of death, blunt force trauma. No murder weapon recovered. What if the key to this case has been right in front of us?" Lane paused, considering his words. Her gaze shifted to Father Sullivan across the room. "The priest's background check came back clean," she said after a moment. 20 years in the diocese, well respected in the community. "Maverick doesn't care about background checks," Hayes replied firmly. "He's alerting to something physical. Something about that cross." As they spoke, Bishop Hoffman approached them. His expression was carefully composed. "Detective Lane, Officer Hayes," he began. "I understand your presence here is necessary, but I must insist on maintaining the dignity of this service. Several parishioners have expressed concern about the disruption." Lane responded diplomatically. "We're in the middle of a murder investigation. Every detail matters right now." Hayes kept his focus on Father Sullivan as the priest leaned down to speak with one of the younger altar boys. The child's expression flickered between respect and unease. Subtle, but evident. Across the room, Tommy's mother, her tear-stained face reflecting the depth of her confusion and grief, noticed the exchange. Father Sullivan now began to move toward a side exit. His pace quickened slightly, beads of sweat visible on his forehead despite the cathedral's cool interior. "He's leaving," Hayes noted quietly. Lane made a quick decision. "Let's approach him now, away from the main congregation." As they moved to intercept the priest, a small boy suddenly appeared in their path. "Officer Hayes," the boy said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Is your dog trying to find who hurt Tommy?" Hayes knelt down to the child's level. "Yes, he is. Did you see something that might help us?" The boy's eyes darted toward Father Sullivan and then back to Hayes. "Tommy said he had a special hiding place with Father Thomas. He said I couldn't tell anyone about it. Ever." A cold sensation settled in Hayes' stomach as he exchanged a look with Lane. "Thank you for telling us, Alex. That's very brave." As they straightened up, Hayes noticed Father Sullivan watching their interaction with the boy. The priest's face was pale, his hand gripping his cross so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. The reception hall had emptied significantly as families departed, leaving behind sympathy cards and condolence calls. Hayes and Lane moved toward Father Sullivan, who was speaking with an elderly parishioner near the side entrance. Maverick moved with deliberate purpose, his training apparent in his controlled alertness. "Father Sullivan," Lane began, her tone professional yet firm. "We'd like a word with you regarding the investigation." The priest's smile faltered slightly before he quickly regained his composure. "Of course, Detective, though perhaps tomorrow might be more appropriate. The Wilson family needs pastoral support right now." "I'm afraid this can't wait," Lane replied, subtly gesturing to Hayes. "What exactly is this about?" Father Sullivan asked, his eyes flicking nervously to Maverick. "Your cross," Hayes said directly. "My partner has been alerting to it throughout the service. In my experience, that means it contains something significant to our investigation." The color drained from Father Sullivan's face. "That's absurd. This was a gift from the Vatican, blessed by the Pope himself during my seminary graduation." His hand instinctively went to the silver pendant, pressing it protectively. "I've worn it for 20 years. Bishop Hoffman appeared beside them, his expression one of concern. "Is there a problem here?" "No problem, Bishop," Father Sullivan quickly replied, his voice steady. "Just a misunderstanding. Father Sullivan," Lane continued calmly, "we received information that Tommy Wilson had a special hiding place here at the church. One that involved you specifically." The priest's expression flickered between shock and calculation. "Children often find quiet spaces in the cathedral. I encourage their exploration of God's house. Then you won't mind if we take a closer look at your cross?" Hayes suggested, stepping forward slightly, as if to remove it from their investigation. Father Sullivan glanced around the now empty reception hall, clearly weighing his options. "I need to use the restroom first, if you'll excuse me." Before anyone could respond, he turned abruptly and hurried down a corridor leading deeper into the church complex. Maverick immediately lunged forward, nearly pulling the leash from Hayes' grip. "He's running," Hayes said sharply, releasing some slack in Maverick's lead. "Find him, boy." The Dutch shepherd shot forward with practiced efficiency, Hayes following close behind, while Lane radioed for backup. Bishop Hoffman stood frozen, shock evident on his face as the implications began to sink in. Maverick tracked the priest through the winding corridors of the cathedral's administrative section. They found Father Sullivan in the vestry, frantically trying to open a small maintenance door that likely led outside. "Father Sullivan, stop!" Hayes commanded. Maverick positioned himself between the priest and the exit. The priest turned back, pressing against the door, his composure shattered. "You don't understand," he gasped, his voice trembling. "None of you understand what's at stake." "What we understand," Lane replied, stepping in behind them, "is that a 10-year-old boy is dead, and your behavior is raising serious concerns about your involvement." "I didn't kill Tommy," Father Sullivan protested, his voice breaking. "I would never hurt him. He was special." Father Sullivan's fingers twisted nervously around his cross as he spoke. His voice barely audible, he seemed to understand the weight of the situation. "Spiritual guidance, special instructions for gifted children." Maverick's low growl filled the room as he remained focused on the cross. Hayes kept the dog steady, sensing the rising tension. "Remove the cross," Lane instructed, her tone firm. With trembling hands, Father Sullivan slowly lifted the chain over his head. As the cross dangled from his fingers, Maverick's behavior grew more intense, his focus unwavering. "Open it," Hayes said suddenly, realization dawning on him. "It's not just a cross, is it?" With a small twist, the silver cross separated into two pieces, revealing a hollowed center that contained a tiny key. The room fell silent. Even Maverick stilled, his mission now accomplished. "What does it open?" Lane asked, her voice chillingly quiet. Father Sullivan stared at the exposed key, all pretenses gone. "A room," he finally admitted, his voice strained. "In the church basement. Behind the old boiler. And Tommy knew about this room." The priest nodded slowly, a tear tracing down his cheek. "He threatened to tell his parents. Said what we were doing was wrong. I just wanted to talk to him. Explain why it had to stay a secret. I never meant to." His voice trailed off, choked with emotion. The descent into St. Augustine's basement felt like a journey into another world. Father Sullivan walked ahead, his hands cuffed behind his back, escorted by two uniformed officers who had responded to Lane's call for backup. Hayes kept Maverick close, the dog's behavior shifting from alert to tracking mode. Whatever scent Maverick had detected in the cross was now confirmed in the musty air of the basement corridors. They passed through a boiler room, its massive equipment humming steadily. Beyond it lay a storage area, filled with Christmas decorations, folding chairs, and boxes of outdated hymnals. Father Sullivan nodded toward a wall covered with metal shelving units, packed with cleaning supplies. As they carefully moved the heavy metal units aside, a door was revealed. Unmarked, painted to blend into the surrounding wall, with no handle visible from this side. The key turned with surprising ease in the lock. Lane pushed the door open, and a scent emerged that caused Maverick to growl low in his throat. It was a complex mix of fear, distress, and human presence, the very scents Maverick had been trained to detect. The hidden room was about 15 by 15 feet, with no windows and a ceiling just high enough for an adult to stand comfortably. The walls were painted a cheerful blue, adorned with childish artwork, hastily taped across the surface. A small table and chairs sat in one corner, with coloring books and crayons scattered across its surface. A bookshelf held children's stories alongside religious texts. In another corner stood a twin bed, with rumpled Star Wars sheets. A child's nightlight shaped like a spaceship sat on a small table nearby, its soft glow creating a false sense of security. Carefully arranged stuffed animals lined a shelf. Gifts, perhaps, to earn trust or to ensure silence. The dichotomy of the room was sickening. A space designed to appear safe and inviting, hiding the darkness that it truly contained. It was a room designed to mask the darkest betrayal. Every colorful detail, every child-friendly touch, was part of a calculated effort to normalize the abnormal. To create an environment where heinous acts could be recast as special attention, as privilege. Maverick moved purposefully into the room, his nose working intently. He headed straight for the bed, pawing at a Spider-Man backpack that was partially hidden beneath it. His behavior had subtly shifted. The alert posture now tinged with what Hayes recognized as distress. Even dogs trained for death investigations sometimes reacted to particularly disturbing scenes, and Maverick was picking up more than just physical evidence. He was detecting the emotional residue of trauma that saturated the space. "That's Tommy's," Lane confirmed, her voice tight. Her professional demeanor remained intact, but Hayes noticed how she avoided touching the bed itself. She kept her distance from an object that represented unimaginable violation. She motioned for the crime scene technicians to begin processing the scene, her instructions precise and thorough. Hayes knelt beside the bed, carefully pulling out the backpack. The name, Tommy W., was written on the inside tag in neat, block letters. Inside were school books, a half-eaten pack of fruit snacks, and a small notebook. Maverick had already moved to a small cabinet beside the bed, his behavior indicating another strong alert. Hayes opened the cabinet carefully, revealing a digital camera and several neatly labeled USB drives, marked with initials and dates. The most recent had TWW written on it. One of the crime scene technicians called from across the room. "Detective, you should see this." She pointed to a section of the wall behind the bookshelf, where a small hole had been drilled into the concrete. A tiny camera lens was visible, positioned to capture the entire room. Before anyone could comment further, Maverick barked sharply, his specific alert for finding human biological evidence. He focused on a spot near the base of the bed. Hayes approached and saw it immediately. A small brownish stain on the concrete floor, partially hidden by a colorful rug. From his training, he recognized it instantly as blood. "Get him out of here," Lane ordered, gesturing to the officers holding Father Sullivan. "Read him his rights again. This is now officially a homicide scene." The crime scene technicians moved efficiently around the room, photographing, collecting, and bagging evidence that would tell the story of what had happened in this hidden space. "Over here," called another technician, holding up a small wooden baseball bat that had been pushed behind the bookshelf. Even from across the room, Hayes could see the darkened stains on its surface. Hayes carefully opened Tommy's notebook, finding pages of childish handwriting. The most recent entry, dated the previous Wednesday, read simply, "I told Father T I'm going to tell Mom and Dad. He got really mad. I don't want to come back here anymore." Lane read over his shoulder, her experienced investigator's eyes taking in the implications. "Motive," she said quietly, her voice steady as they continued processing the scene. Hayes found himself drawn to the children's artwork taped to the walls. Most were innocuous, crosses, churches, angels drawn in bright crayon colors. But several depicted a small figure lying on what appeared to be the bed in the corner, while a larger figure stood. Nearby, Maverick had returned to Tommy's backpack, nudging it insistently. Hayes knelt down to examine it more closely and discovered a hidden pocket containing a small digital voice recorder. Tommy had been collecting evidence, Hayes realized, handing the device to Lane. The detective's eyes widened slightly. "Smart kid. Brave kid." The technical team would need to process the recording, but a preliminary test revealed Tommy's voice clearly capturing a damning conversation. "I don't want to play these games anymore, Father Thomas. These aren't games, Tommy. This is special instruction. You're chosen. My mom says no one should touch me that way. I'm going to tell her." "You can't do that, Tommy. No one would understand our special relationship. It would hurt the church. Hurt me. You don't want to hurt me, do you?" "I'm still going to tell." The recording ended with the sound of a struggle, followed by silence. Lane closed her eyes briefly, centering herself before speaking. "Cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. The baseball bat matches the wound pattern." As word spread through the church community, other parents began to come forward, describing behavioral changes in their children after receiving special religious instruction from Father Sullivan. The hidden room, designed to look friendly and inviting, had been a calculated trap, a predator's lair disguised as a sanctuary. Bishop Hoffman shook his head, grief etched on his face. Father Sullivan supervised our youth ministry programs for the past decade. Hundreds of children have passed through his care. We've got hair samples from at least 3 different children on the bed sheets, reported forensic technician Alvarez, carefully sealing evidence bags. Preliminary match to Tommy on the baseball bat. Both hair and what appears to be blood near a small chest of drawers. Maverick alerted again, sitting rigidly with his nose pointed toward the bottom drawer. Inside, they found a photo album. Unlike the digital camera and USB drives, this album contained printed photographs. Dozens of children, all roughly between 8 and 11 years old, in various church settings. Each photo was carefully labeled with names and dates, stretching back 5 years. He documented everything, Lane said, her voice tight with controlled rage. Kept souvenirs. I recognize many of these children from our parish, Bishop Hoffman said, examining the album. This one. M. Brennan. His family moved away abruptly last year. They said it was for his father's job, but the boy had become withdrawn. Stopped participating in church activities. Lane's phone rang, and after a brief conversation, her expression hardened further. Officers found a locked cabinet in Father Sullivan's residence. Inside, they discovered dozens more USB drives and journals dating back 15 years. This didn't start here, Hayes said grimly. A pattern, beginning when suspicions arose, starting fresh with new victims. Tommy's voice recorder provided the final piece of the timeline. After threatening to expose Father Sullivan, Tommy had been struck with the baseball bat in a moment of rage or panic. The priest had then carried the boy's body to the wooded area behind the church, attempting to make it appear as though Tommy had been attacked while cutting through the woods on his way home. A route many local children used. What Father Sullivan hadn't anticipated was Tommy's foresight in documenting the abuse. Nor could he have known about Maverick's extraordinary ability to detect evidence. Others might have missed the cross containing the key to the hidden room, but it had absorbed trace evidence from Tommy's blood, creating a scent signature that Maverick immediately recognized. By the time Hayes led Maverick out of the police station, the evening sky had darkened to a deep indigo. Both of them were exhausted from hours of evidence processing and preliminary interviews. The media had camped outside in force, cameras flashing as they emerged. Questions were shouted from all directions. Hayes guided Maverick through the crowd, his hand protectively on his partner. He offered no comments despite the barrage of inquiries. At the edge of the media circus, Tommy's parents stood with victim advocates, their faces bearing the hollow shock of parents who had lost their child twice. Once to murder, and again to the horrific truth of what had preceded it. When they spotted Hayes and Maverick, Tommy's mother broke away from the group and approached, her husband following close behind. "Officer Hayes," she said, her voice steady despite her red-rimmed eyes. "May I?" She gestured toward Maverick. Hayes nodded, giving Maverick the signal that it was okay to be touched by a stranger. The Dutch shepherd remained perfectly still as Mrs. Wilson knelt beside him. "You found the truth," she whispered to the dog, gently placing a hand on his head. "When no one else could see it. You knew." Her composure broke then, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for speaking for my son, when he couldn't speak for himself." Mr. Wilson stood behind his wife, one hand on her shoulder. "The detectives told us how your dog kept alerting to the cross. That without his insistence, they might never have discovered what was happening." His voice cracked with emotion. "How many other children has he saved by exposing this?" "Maverick was just doing what he's trained to do," Hayes replied quietly. "Finding the truth, no matter where it's hidden." Mrs. Wilson rose, wiping tears from her face. "Tommy wanted to be a police officer when he grew up. He would have thought your partner was the bravest, coolest dog in the world." She attempted a smile that didn't quite form. "I keep thinking about how he tried to stand up to Father Sullivan. How he was recording everything. Even at 10, he was trying to protect other kids." Once inside his SUV, away from the cameras and crowds, Hayes allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. Maverick settled into his compartment, but remained alert, sensitive as always to his handler's emotional state. "You did good today, partner," Hayes murmured, reaching back to scratch behind Maverick's ears. "Really good." The case would continue for months: interviews, evidence analysis, court proceedings. But the critical breakthrough had happened in those moments when a dog's instincts had cut through layers of deception and authority to find the terrible truth hidden behind a silver cross. Hayes thought about the hidden room. It had been designed to appear welcoming and fun, while concealing its true purpose. How many times had children been led down those stairs, trusting in the authority figure guiding them? How many had tried to speak up, only to be dismissed or silenced? The cross that had hidden the key had been the perfect symbol of Father Sullivan's betrayal, using faith to disguise the darkest of actions. Have you ever witnessed an animal sense something that the people around them couldn't detect? Perhaps a dog that refused to trust someone everyone else found charming, or a pet that seemed to know when something was wrong before anyone else realized it. Animals possess instincts unclouded by social conditioning. They respond to what is, not what appears to be. If you've ever had a moment when an animal's instincts proved more accurate than human judgment, we'd love to hear your story in the comments below. How many times have we dismissed these warnings, only to discover later that our four-legged friends were right all along? Our K9 heroes work tirelessly alongside law enforcement every day, using their extraordinary abilities to find missing persons, detect dangerous substances, and, as Maverick demonstrated, uncover evidence that might otherwise remain hidden. Their contributions to justice deserve our recognition and respect. If this story moved you, please hit the subscribe button and share it with others who appreciate the remarkable bond between humans and working dogs. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss another incredible K9 tale. Check out our previous stories appearing on your screen now, and remember, sometimes the truth comes to light, not through human intuition, but through the unwavering instincts of a dog who refuses to be silenced.